December 1944, above the Philippine Islands. The radar operator squints at his screen, confused. 6 Japanese fighters climbing hard, scrambling to intercept American bombers. They don't see him yet. The silver twin-tailed shape hanging 5,000 feet above them, perfectly positioned between them and the sun. Major Richard Bong pushes the control stick forward. His P-38 Lightning drops from the sky like a falcon. The Japanese pilots, eyes fixed on the bombers ahead, never see death coming. 4 seconds. That's how long it takes. A single surgical burst from his nose cannons. The lead Zero erupts into flame. Before the debris stops falling, Bong is already gone, climbing back to altitude, invisible again, waiting for his next victim. This wasn't luck. This wasn't even skill in the traditional sense. This was something else entirely. A level of aerial dominance so complete, so mathematically perfect, that 80 years later, no American pilot has come close to matching it. By the end of World War II, this quiet farm boy from Wisconsin would have 40 confirmed kills. It's a record that will never be broken, not because modern pilots lack the courage or talent, but because the kind of war that created Richard Bong simply doesn't exist anymore. But here's the question that haunts military historians to this day. How did the least aggressive, most methodical pilot in the Pacific Theater become its most lethal killer? The answer reveals a truth about excellence that extends far beyond aviation. Bong didn't win by being fearless. He won by being smarter. And in the process, he rewrote the entire playbook for aerial combat. This is the story of how a rule-breaking farm boy became an untouchable legend, and why his methods still matter today. Part 1. The Boy Who Lived in the Sky, 1938. Poplar, Wisconsin. Richard Ira Bong was the oldest of 9 children in a Swedish immigrant family. His father worked in construction. His mother ran the household with quiet efficiency. They had a small farm, enough land to keep the family fed, and not much else. Nothing about young Dick Bong suggested destiny. He was shy, soft-spoken, the kind of kid who preferred fixing engines to talking to people. His teachers described him as unremarkable. His classmates barely noticed him. But when he was alone, something changed. He would disappear for hours into the Wisconsin woods, hunting with his .22 rifle. And here's what's critical. Bong was an exceptional marksman. Not because he was naturally gifted with hand-eye coordination, but because he was patient. He would track a rabbit or a deer for hours, positioning himself perfectly, waiting for the one moment when the shot was guaranteed. One shot, one kill. That was the rule. Ammunition cost money his family didn't have to waste. Years later, when aviation psychologists studied Bong's combat footage, they identified this exact pattern. The same patience, the same refusal to take a shot until success was mathematically certain, the same conservation of resources. What worked on rabbits in Wisconsin would work on Japanese fighters 8,000 miles away. This habit, this discipline, would later save his life hundreds of times in combat. But nobody knew that yet. To everyone in Poplar, Dick Bong was just another quiet kid who liked machines. His younger siblings remember him differently. They remember a brother who was endlessly curious about how things worked. Engines, radios, clocks, anything mechanical. He'd take them apart on the kitchen table, study the components, then reassemble them perfectly. His mother complained about the grease stains. His father saw something else, a mind that understood systems intuitively. In 1938, he enrolled at Superior State Teachers College. His plan was simple: become a teacher, settle down, live a normal life. He was studying to teach industrial arts, fitting, given his mechanical aptitude. But halfway through his first year, everything changed. He walked past a post office in Superior and saw a recruitment poster. "Earn your wings. The Army was recruiting for its aviation cadet program. For a boy who'd spent his childhood staring at the sky, watching barnstormers perform at county fairs, it wasn't really a choice. Here's what's remarkable. Bong had never been in an airplane. He'd never even been close to one. But something about flight called to him with an intensity he couldn't explain. He filled out the application that same day. The selection process was brutal. Only 1 in 5 applicants made it through. The Army wanted men with perfect eyesight, quick reflexes, strong constitutions, and the temperament to remain calm under pressure. Bong passed every test. By May 1941, he was at Lindbergh Field in San Diego, beginning flight training. His instructors noticed something unusual immediately. Most cadets struggled with the transition from ground to air. The disorientation, the vertigo, the sheer terror of being suspended in 3-dimensional space. Bong took to it like he'd been born in the cockpit. One instructor wrote in his evaluation, "Cadet Bong demonstrates an almost preternatural feel for aircraft. He doesn't fly the plane. He becomes part of it. He soloed after just 8 hours of instruction. The average was 12. He graduated from advanced flight training in January 1942, 1 month after Pearl Harbor. The world was at war, and Second Lieutenant Richard Bong was about to meet the machine that would make him immortal." Part 2. The Lightning and the Stunt, Hamilton Field, California. Summer 1942. The P-38 Lightning was unlike anything that had ever been built. Twin engines, twin tail booms, a central nacelle that looked like a spaceship. It was fast, heavily armed, and absolutely gorgeous. The moment Bong saw it, he fell in love. But here's what made the P-38 truly revolutionary. Most fighters had wing-mounted guns. This created a fundamental problem. The bullets had to be angled inward to converge at a specific distance, usually around 250 yards. Fire too close or too far, and you'd miss completely. The pilot had to estimate range perfectly while simultaneously controlling the aircraft, tracking a moving target, and avoiding enemy fire. It was extraordinarily difficult. Most pilots never mastered it. The P-38's guns were all mounted in the nose, 4 50 caliber machine guns, 1 20mm cannon, all firing in a perfectly parallel stream of destruction. The implications were staggering. If you could get an enemy in your sights for even half a second, they were dead. It was that simple. There was no complex trigonometry, no range estimation. Point and shoot. But the P-38 came with serious drawbacks. It was complex, temperamental, and deadly to inexperienced pilots. The twin engines required constant attention. If one engine failed, the torque from the remaining engine could flip the aircraft into an uncontrollable spin. The turbo superchargers, which gave it high-altitude performance, were prone to failure. And in a high-speed dive, the aircraft suffered from a phenomenon called compressibility, where shock waves would form on the wings, locking the controls and sending the pilot into a death spiral. Dozens of pilots had already died learning to fly it. Bong studied the aircraft like a scholar studies a text. He read every manual, memorized every system, talked to every mechanic. He understood that the P-38 wasn't just fast. It was a complete weapons platform that required total mastery. And then, once he felt he understood it, he proceeded to nearly destroy his career. Official records describe what happened next as unauthorized aerobatics. That's a polite way of saying Bong turned the skies over San Francisco into his personal stunt show. He buzzed Market Street so low that people could read his plane's serial number. Witnesses reported that he flew between buildings, the roar of his twin engines echoing off skyscrapers. He looped under the Golden Gate Bridge, a maneuver so reckless, it's hard to believe he survived. The bridge cables passed just feet from his canopy. On one occasion, he flew past an office building at the 4th floor level. Secretaries dove under their desks. Several people called the police, thinking San Francisco was under attack. He was showing off for a girl he'd met. Her name was Marjorie Vattendahl. He'd paint her name on his aircraft later, and it would become one of the most famous nose arts of the war. But in the moment, his commanding officer was not amused. General George Kenney was a no-nonsense strategist, the architect of the entire 5th Air Force's tactical doctrine. He was one of the most respected commanders in the military, a man who had zero tolerance for cowboys and hotshots. When Bong was dragged into his office, he expected to be court-martialed, maybe even imprisoned. Instead, something remarkable happened. Kenney ripped into him, a blistering, career-ending dressing down. He called Bong reckless, irresponsible, and a danger to everyone around him. He said that pilots like him got good men killed. The tirade lasted 20 minutes, but as Bong stood there at attention, Kenney saw something in his eyes. Not defiance, not arrogance, not the cocky bravado of a typical hotshot pilot. Confidence, an absolute mastery of his aircraft that Kenney had rarely seen. Here's what Kenney wrote in his diary that night. "This boy is either going to be the greatest pilot in the Air Force, or he's going to kill himself trying. I intend to find out which." Kenney made a decision that changed the course of the air war. Instead of grounding Bong, he kept him under direct supervision. More training, more discipline, longer flights, more complex maneuvers, more time in the aircraft until the recklessness was replaced by precision. And then, when he was ready, when Kenney was certain that the raw talent had been refined into something lethal, he sent Bong to the one place where natural ability would either be forged into brilliance or destroyed entirely. The Pacific Theater, where the best pilots in the world were waiting to kill him. Part 3. The Zero Problem, New Guinea, September 1942. When Bong arrived in New Guinea, the American air campaign in the Pacific was in crisis. Here's what the American pilots faced. The Japanese were flying the Mitsubishi A6M-0, and the Zero was, by every measurable standard, a better dogfighter than anything the Allies had. It weighed just 6,000 pounds fully loaded. The P-38 weighed 17,500 pounds. The Zero could execute a complete 360-degree turn in 16 seconds. The P-38 took 28 seconds. In a close-quarters turning battle, the classic dogfight of movie fame, the Zero would spiral inside the American fighter, line up a shot, and shred it with cannon fire. Worse, the Japanese pilots were veterans. They'd been fighting since 1937, accumulating thousands of combat hours over China. They knew every trick, every maneuver, every way to exploit an enemy's weakness. American pilots, by contrast, were rookies. Most had fewer than 200 flight hours total. Many had never fired their guns in anger before arriving in theater. And when they encountered Zeros for the first time, they made a fatal mistake. They tried to fight them the traditional way. Close quarters turning battles, circle each other, tighten the turn, get on the enemy's tail. It was a massacre. In the first 6 months of the Pacific War, the kill ratio heavily favored Japan. American pilots were dying at an alarming rate, and nobody seemed to have an answer. Morale was collapsing. Squadrons were being decimated. Then Bong arrived in New Guinea, and he did something that separated him from every other pilot in theater. He watched, he studied, he learned. For his first 2 weeks in combat, Bong barely fired his guns. He flew escort missions, stayed with the bombers, and observed. He watched how the Japanese attacked. He noted their tactics, their formations, their tendencies. He studied after-action reports. He interviewed pilots who'd survived encounters with Zeros, and he came to a conclusion that would change everything. You can't beat the Zero at its own game, so don't play its game. The P-38 couldn't turn with a Zero. Fine, it didn't need to. What the P-38 could do was climb faster, dive faster, and hit harder than anything Japan had in the air. It had superior high-altitude performance thanks to its turbo superchargers. It had superior speed in level flight and in dives. And it had devastating firepower concentrated in the nose. Bong developed a tactical system so brutally effective that it became the foundation for American fighter doctrine for the rest of the war. He called it speed and altitude. Others would later call it boom and zoom. The system was elegantly simple. Climb above the enemy. Always. The P-38's turbocharged engines could reach 30,000 feet with ease. The Zero struggled above 20,000 feet, where the thin air starved its engine. Up there, Bong was untouchable. Position yourself between the enemy and the sun. Solar glare is blinding. The Japanese pilots would be looking up into a wall of light. They'd never see him coming. Dive at maximum speed. Convert altitude into speed. By the time the enemy saw him, he'd be going 400 plus mph in a near vertical dive. Too fast for them to react. Too fast for them to evade. Fire one concentrated burst. The P-38's nose-mounted guns meant every bullet went exactly where he aimed. He'd fire for less than 2 seconds, just enough to guarantee a kill. Climb back to altitude. Never stick around. Never try to turn. Use momentum to regain altitude. Reset. Hunt again. It was a vertical war. While Japanese pilots were trying to outturn each other at 10,000 feet, Bong was playing a completely different game at 25,000 feet. His first kill came on December 27, 1942, a Zero over Buna. He spotted it at 15,000 feet, climbed to 22,000, positioned himself in the sun, and dove. The Zero pilot never saw him. One burst from Bong's guns, and the Zero exploded midair. Bong didn't celebrate. He climbed back to altitude and looked for another target. Within 3 months, he had 5 kills. He was officially an ace. Within 6 months, he had 12 kills, and a reputation as the most dangerous pilot in the Pacific Theater. This would become his signature. Cold, efficient, lethal. No wasted motion, no wasted ammunition, no unnecessary risks, just mathematics, geometry, physics applied with surgical precision. Part 4, The Surgeon of the Sky, 1943, The Solomons Campaign. By mid-1943, Bong's reputation was growing. His squadron mates started calling him the Ace of Aces, even before he'd broken any records. Why? Because of how he fought. Most pilots, in the chaos of combat, would see an enemy and immediately attack. Adrenaline would take over. They'd spray bullets, hope something hit, engage in wild dogfights that burned through fuel and ammunition and often ended with the American pilot dead. Bong was different, unnervingly different. Major Thomas Lynch, himself an ace with 20 kills, described watching Bong in combat. He'd stalk an enemy for 5, sometimes 10 minutes, positioning, adjusting, waiting for the perfect shot. Then one burst, and it was over. I've never seen anything like it. It was like watching a sniper work. Here's a specific example from July 26, 1943. Bong was escorting B-24 bombers over Lae, New Guinea. Intelligence had warned that heavy Japanese fighter presence was expected. Sure enough, a formation of 20 Japanese fighters appeared on the horizon, climbing to intercept the bombers. Standard procedure was to engage immediately. Dive into the enemy formation, break it up through aggressive action, protect the bombers through sheer violence. Bong didn't engage. He climbed, higher and higher, until he was 5,000 feet above the entire battle. His wingman radioed, confused, asking what they were doing. The bombers were in danger. They needed to attack now. Bong's response: wait. He watched the Japanese commit to their attack run on the bombers, watched them dive, accelerating, fixated on their targets, watched them expose their backs. Then, now, He dove at terminal velocity, his P-38 screaming through the air at over 404 km/h. The Japanese never saw him. In 30 seconds, he destroyed 2 fighters and damaged a third so severely it crashed minutes later. By the time the enemy formation reacted, he was already climbing back to safety. 0 American losses in that engagement. All bombers returned safely. This is what separated Bong from every other pilot. He understood that air combat wasn't about bravery or aggression. It was about geometry, angles, energy, positioning. It was chess played at 400 miles per hour. His after-action reports read like math problems. Engaged enemy at 23,000 FTO diving speed, 420 per hour, deflection angle 15 degrees, firing solution achieved at 200 yards, 1 burst, 2 seconds, enemy aircraft destroyed. No emotion, no drama, just data. Intelligence officers who studied his gun camera footage noticed something extraordinary. Bong's accuracy rate was nearly 3 times higher than the average pilot. Most pilots fired thousands of rounds to score a kill. Bong averaged fewer than 100 rounds per kill. He was conserving ammunition not out of caution, but out of absolute confidence. He knew that if he took the shot, the enemy was dead, so he only took shots he was certain of. By the end of 1943, Bong had 21 confirmed kills. He was America's leading ace, and the military brass was starting to realize they had something special, something worth protecting. Part 5. The record that couldn't last, 1944. The race against Rickenbacker. By April 1944, Richard Bong had 28 confirmed kills. This put him within striking distance of a record that had stood for 26 years. Eddie Rickenbacker's World War I tally of 26 victories. The American public became obsessed. Newspapers ran daily updates. Bong ties Rickenbacker. Bong breaks the record. Radio broadcasts tracked his progress. He received thousands of letters from Americans thanking him, praising him, treating him like a national hero. For a man who hated publicity, it was torture. Bong wrote to Marjorie, "I just want to do my job. I don't want to be a headline. I don't want people thinking I'm out here collecting victories like they're trophies. Every kill is a man who died. I don't celebrate that." But General Kenney understood something important. America needed heroes. The war was grinding on. Casualties were mounting. The list of dead was growing longer every day. Morale was fragile. Richard Bong, the humble farm boy who didn't seek glory, but found it anyway, was the perfect symbol of American values. So Kenney made a decision that probably saved Bong's life. After Bong broke Rickenbacker's record in April 1944, Kenney grounded him from routine combat missions. Bong was furious. "Sir, with respect, I'm not done. My squadron needs me. The war isn't over." Kenney's response was blunt. "Major, you're too valuable to lose. You're not just a pilot anymore. You're a symbol. If you die, the morale impact would be catastrophic. I won't allow it." But here's the compromise. Bong could still fly high-priority missions, escort missions, where bomber crews faced maximum danger. Missions where his tactical genius and experience could save lives. He wasn't being retired, he was being deployed strategically. And so Bong kept flying, and his kill count kept climbing. By June 1944, he had 32 kills. By August, 36. By October, 38. And then came a mission that would cement his legend forever. October 10th, 1944, Balikpapan, Borneo. It was a critical mission. American B-24 bombers were striking Japanese oil refineries at Balikpapan. These refineries supplied fuel for the entire Japanese war effort in the region. Destroying them would cripple enemy operations for months. But the Japanese knew how important Balikpapan was. They threw everything they had at the American formation. 50 Japanese fighters swarmed the bombers. Bong, leading a flight of P-38s, positioned his formation with the sun at their backs. A classic tactic. The Japanese would be blind. He led the initial attack, diving from 28,000 feet at over 450 mph. His first burst destroyed a Japanese fighter before the pilot even knew he was under attack. Bong pulled up, converted his speed back into altitude, and reset for another pass. But as he climbed, his aircraft shuddered violently. An explosion rocked the airframe. A Japanese fighter had gotten behind him. 20 mm cannon shells ripped through his right engine. Warning lights flashed across his instrument panel. The engine was on fire, oil pressure dropping, temperature spiking. The propeller windmilled uselessly. Most pilots would have disengaged immediately. Diving for home on a single engine was the smart thing to do. The sane thing to do. A P-38 with one engine was barely controllable. But Richard Bong wasn't interested in smart or sane. He was a predator. And there were still bombers that needed protection. He feathered the dead propeller to reduce drag, hit the fire extinguisher system. The fire went out. He assessed the situation. His remaining engine was at full power. His controls still responded. His guns still worked. And there were still Japanese fighters in the sky. With his P-38 crippled and trailing smoke, he banked the heavy fighter back into the dogfight. He lined up another Japanese aircraft in his sights. One burst. The enemy exploded. Only then, only after he'd scored his second kill of the day, did he turn for home. The flight back was 300 miles of open ocean. His crippled P-38 struggled to maintain altitude. If the remaining engine failed, he'd be dead. No one would find him in the vastness of the Pacific. But the engine held. And 3 hours later, Bong landed at his base. When the ground crews saw the damage, they were horrified. The entire right engine was destroyed. The wing structure was compromised. Dozens of bullet holes peppered the fuselage. They declared the aircraft combat ineffective, destined for the scrap heap. Bong overruled them. He personally supervised the repairs, and within 2 weeks, he was flying Marge again. This single incident cemented his legend. He wasn't just skilled, he was unbreakable. He wasn't just an ace, he was mythical. By December 1944, he had 40 confirmed aerial victories. 40. The number was so far beyond anyone else that it seemed almost unreal. Back in the United States, at the highest levels of command, a decision was made. General Douglas MacArthur himself issued the order to General Kenney. Richard Bong was to be permanently grounded. His war was over, whether he liked it or not. His final combat mission was on December 17, 1944. It was an uneventful patrol over Mindoro. No enemy contact, no drama. Unceremoniously, the combat career of the most successful fighter pilot in American history came to an end. Part 6, The Medal and the Marriage, January 1945, the Pentagon. The ceremony was held in the Secretary of War's office. A small room, really, considering the magnitude of what was happening. Secretary Henry Stimson stood before a crowd of generals, journalists, and dignitaries. And in the center, looking profoundly uncomfortable in his dress uniform, stood Major Richard Bong. Stimson read the citation for the Medal of Honor, America's highest award for valor. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity, at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty in action with the enemy. Major Bong displayed extraordinary heroism, leadership, and skill in aerial combat. His personal courage and devotion to duty are in keeping with the highest traditions of military service. The words felt inadequate. How do you summarize 200 combat missions? How do you quantify 40 confirmed kills? How do you measure the bomber crews he saved, the lives he protected, the tactical doctrine he revolutionized? Stimson placed the medal around Bong's neck. Photographers' flashbulbs popped. Reporters shouted questions. Bong said almost nothing. He thanked the secretary. He thanked General Kenney. He said he was honored. and then he left as quickly as protocol allowed. In private, he told a friend, "I don't feel like a hero. I feel like a pilot who did his job. The real heroes are the ones who didn't make it home." But finally, after years of war, he could go home. On February 10, 1945, he married Marjorie Vattendahl in a small church in Superior, Wisconsin. The ceremony was modest. His family was there. Her family. A few close friends. No journalists. No cameras. Just a quiet celebration of two people who'd waited years to start their life together. For one brief, perfect moment, the deadliest fighter pilot in American history was just a 24-year-old kid who'd married his high school sweetheart. He was safe. The war was almost over. Germany would surrender in 3 months. Japan would follow. He had his whole life ahead of him. Or so everyone thought. Part 7. The Jet Age and the Final Flight. Lockheed Air Terminal, Burbank, California, August 6, 1945. The military had a new assignment for Bong, test pilot for the P-80 Shooting Star, America's first operational jet fighter. It made sense. Who better to transition into the jet age than the man who'd mastered the piston era? Who better to write the tactical doctrine for a completely new type of warfare? But jets were different. Radically different. The P-80 had no propeller, no torque effects, no reciprocating engine vibrations. It flew faster than anything Bong had ever experienced. It responded differently to control inputs. And it had already killed several test pilots. Fuel system failures, engine flameouts at critical moments, compressibility problems at high speeds. The P-80 was cutting-edge technology, which meant it was also dangerously unstable. Bong approached it with his characteristic methodical discipline. He studied the manuals. He talked to the engineers. He flew the aircraft cautiously at first, learning its characteristics, understanding its quirks. But here's the thing about test flying. It's fundamentally different from combat. In combat, you control when you take risks. In test flying, you're required to push the aircraft into unknown territory. You're required to find its breaking points. That's the job. On the morning of August 6, 1945, Bong was assigned to perform a standard acceptance flight on a brand new P-80, fresh from the factory. Take it up, run through the systems checklist, verify everything works, bring it home. Routine. He arrived at the airfield at 8 a.m. He went through his pre-flight inspection, a habit from his combat days. Check the control surfaces, check the fuel lines, check the engine intake. Everything looked good. He climbed into the cockpit. The P-80's canopy slid shut with a pneumatic hiss, sealing him inside. He ran through the startup checklist. The jet engine spooled up with its characteristic high-pitched whine, building to a scream. At 8:30 a.m., he received clearance for takeoff. He taxied onto the runway, pushed the throttle forward. The jet accelerated rapidly, pushing him back into his seat. At 120 Mach, he rotated. The nose lifted. The P-80 climbed into the California sky. 2 minutes later, at 500 feet altitude, the primary fuel pump failed. The engine didn't sputter. It didn't cough. It simply stopped. The high-pitched scream dropped to silence. Bong was suddenly flying a 10,000-pound glider. Below him, suburban Los Angeles stretched to the horizon. Houses, streets, families having breakfast. He had perhaps 30 seconds to live. He tried the emergency restart procedure. No response. The engine was completely dead. He tried to glide back toward the runway, but he didn't have the altitude. The P-80's glide ratio was terrible. It fell like a rock without power. His last option, bail out. But he was at 500 feet. The ejection seat needed at least 1,000 feet to work properly. At this altitude, the parachute wouldn't have time to deploy. He pulled the ejection handle anyway. It was his only chance. The canopy blew off. The ejection seat fired. Bong was hurled into the air above the tumbling aircraft, but he was too low. Far too low. The parachute began to deploy, the canopy just starting to billow. The P-80 hit the ground nose first in an open field and exploded. A massive fireball of burning jet fuel. Richard Bong's body was found 100 feet from the wreckage. He'd been killed on impact with the ground. Major Richard Ira Bong, the ace of aces, the farm boy from Wisconsin, the deadliest American fighter pilot in history, was dead. He was 24 years old. He survived 200 combat missions. He survived being shot at by hundreds of enemy pilots. He survived a crippled aircraft over the Pacific, and he died in a routine test flight 6,000 miles from the war, killed by a faulty fuel pump. That same day, on the other side of the world, a B-29 superfortress named Enola Gay flew high over Japan. At 8:15 a.m. Japanese time, it opened its bomb bay doors over the city of Hiroshima. A single bomb fell from the aircraft. The crew turned hard and dove to escape the blast radius. 43 seconds later, the bomb detonated 1,900 feet above the city. In an instant, 80,000 people were vaporized. The shock wave leveled everything within a mile. A mushroom cloud rose 7 miles into the sky. The atomic age had begun. The news of Bong's death was buried on page 7 of most newspapers, overshadowed completely by the dawn of nuclear warfare. The New York Times gave Hiroshima the entire front page. Bong's obituary was 3 paragraphs in the back section. In one of history's cruelest ironies, the greatest ace of conventional warfare died the exact day his type of war became obsolete. The dogfight, the close-quarters aerial duel, the kind of combat that had defined air warfare for 40 years, all of it rendered meaningless by a single bomb. The era of the fighter ace died the same day Richard Bong did. Epilogue: The Legacy That Won't Die, 2025, 80 years later. Richard Bong's record of 40 confirmed aerial victories still stands, and it will stand forever. Modern air combat is fought at 50 miles with radar-guided missiles. Pilots never see their targets with their own eyes. The days of close-quarters dogfights, the kind of knife fights in the sky that defined World War II, are over. The target-rich environment that produced aces simply doesn't exist anymore. No American pilot since Vietnam has scored more than 5 kills. Most modern fighter pilots retire without ever engaging an enemy aircraft. The air war has changed fundamentally. But Bong's impact goes far beyond the number. He fundamentally changed how fighter pilots think about combat. His doctrine of energy management, vertical tactics, and disciplined attack runs became the foundation of American fighter tactics. The Navy's Top Gun program, established in 1969, teaches principles that Bong pioneered in 1943. The Air Force's Fighter Weapons School does the same. Modern fighter pilots study his gun camera footage. They analyze his decision-making. They learn from his patience, his discipline, his refusal to fight on the enemy's terms. At the Richard Thurst Bong Veterans Historical Center in Superior, Wisconsin, a restored P-38 Lightning sits on display. The name Marge is painted on its nose, just as it was 80 years ago. Next to it, in a glass case, rests his Medal of Honor. Every year, a few thousand people visit. Veterans, aviation enthusiasts, school kids on field trips. They walk around the P-38, marveling at its twin booms and distinctive profile. Most of them don't fully comprehend what they're looking at. They see a vintage aircraft, a piece of history, a relic from a war their grandparents fought. What they don't see, what's invisible to casual observers, is one of history's most perfect weapon systems. Not the plane, the man who flew it. Because here's the truth about Richard Bong. He wasn't the most naturally talented pilot. His instructors noted that he was good, but not exceptional. He wasn't the most aggressive. In fact, he was criticized early in his career for being too cautious. He wasn't fearless. His letters reveal he was terrified before every mission, convinced each one might be his last. What he was disciplined. He turned warfare into science. He refused to fight on his enemy's terms. He mastered his tools so completely that he made the impossible look routine. He understood something that most people never learn. Excellence isn't about talent or bravery. It's about systems, discipline, the patient application of proven principles, even when every instinct screams at you to abandon them. In combat, most pilots would see a target and attack immediately, driven by adrenaline and instinct. Bong would wait, position, calculate, and only when success was guaranteed would he strike. That patience, that discipline, is what made him untouchable. Consider this. In 200 combat missions, Bong was shot down exactly 0 times. His aircraft was damaged twice. He never bailed out. He never crash-landed. He never required rescue. Compare that to other top aces of the war. The German ace